MAGA is a cult. Like that is a cult. They even refer to themselves as a group. And it's kind of the culmination of a 40, 50 year, conglomeration of all of these cults of idea that have been building. And then somebody put them all together.
Yeah.
And yeah.
So but I don't think MAGA is the only cult in politics, right? So
I agree.
we're gonna do a different segment on cults now. It could be pretty applicable to the cult in Congress as well. But we're bringing on what's some of you know as the knitting cult lady. She's a fun title already. It's Daniela Mestenak Young. She's an author and cult scholar. And yes, she actually does knit. There it is, literally, okay? And she's a TEDx speaker. She's a sex cult survivor, a US Army combat veteran, and yes, an advanced knitter. Okay, and her upcoming book is The Culting of America, What Makes a Cult and Why We Love Them, which is interesting. So Danielle, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Cenk.
No problem. So tell me, what makes a cult?
Exploitation of labor. It's organized crime.
Oh, that's super interesting. I had not heard that definition before. Okay.
It's a much longer and more complicated answer than that, of course. And I have a 10-part definition of cult, and that's what I go into in the book. But the thing that changed my life was when I heard someone say cults are all about labor. And then I understood.
That's so interesting because this has kind of been a theme for us a little bit. I've talked to a number of people about cults recently, and you're right that I had not connected those dots until now, because like the Scientology cult survivor talked about how they kept taking the children and using them for labor and more labor and nonstop work, right? And then we had a Christian nationalist cult survivor, similar story. Obviously, there's also abuse, right? So, is the point labor, free labor? Is the point sexual abuse? Is the point power?
The point is power and labor. I personally truly believe that cult leaders are generally sociopaths. And part of that is just the love of playing power games. And they don't necessarily have to have a logic. It's just the power game for the power game's sake. But cults always come down to labor, and money is part of how we represent labor. But the sexual abuse is part of power. The exploiting people's labor is part of power.
So, I get why they do it, right? If you can convince a whole bunch of people to do your work for you and make money for you, and then you abuse that power in whatever ways, and you're a bad guy, I get it. But what's really hard to understand is how do they work? Like, why does it work on people? I mean, that's the second half of your book, right? Why we love them. How is it that they are able to get people to follow them in what from the outside looks like a crazy scenario? Why would you do all this stuff for this guy for no reason?
Yeah, so that's the mission. And it's what we call a transcendent mission, which is something that is beyond, right? Time, space. It's really, really big. Save the children is often some kind of the transcendent mission. And we see cult leaders will often get into either politics or some sort of charity work, including religious-based charity works, because those are easy things to what I call missionize, like weaponize the mission. It allows them a convenient looking front. And nobody joins a cult because a cult leader is charismatic. They join a cult because a charismatic person weaponizes a mission and then builds a structure to coerce them.
Super interesting. So how do you know if you're part of a good mission or secretly a cult mission?
If you joke about being a cult, it's bad news bears, okay? I think we need to ask ourselves, like, is the mission achievable? First of all, right? Like, is it achievable in this lifetime? How are we defining it? And then where's the labor? And what tactics are being used to get the labor? Because so many things with missions are asking people to just constantly self-sacrifice. And that's actually the way cults break you, is with the self-sacrifice. So for me, the line, it can be as good of a mission as possible, but if it's using coercive tactics to get more out of people, it's harming the individuals that are involved.
That one's a little tougher for me because I can see how really good missions to cure breast cancer, United Way, whatever it might be, might ask you to feed the homeless. You're going to do free labor to feed the homeless, but that really is the mission. So it's a little
And
tough to know where to draw the line.
and this is where, for me, I concentrate on the tactics, right? Like, if you are using coercive tactics to get people to give more than they would otherwise, this gets very confusing because the military and tech and all of the things from which we get our corporate culture uses a little bit of coercive tactics. And this is part of what I'm trying to show in the book. I think often that nonprofits end up exploiting people.
Super
But
interesting.
but another thing is that I do not buy the narrative that it started off good and then turned into a cult. I've never seen an example of this. I've absolutely, can something start off good and end up harming some individuals? Yes. But cult leaders, they learn how to do this, they practice this, and then they go for their prey.
So what are some of the coercive tactics?
Okay, so keeping people skinny is one. It's a very interesting one we find now. Isolation is one of your biggest ones, right? And isolation these days does not have to be on physical communes anymore, but controlling what your people are ingesting. That can be physically, that can be mentally, psychologically, right? Just complete control. And then another tactic is self sacrifice, getting people to separate themselves from their personal identity, which is what you spent your whole life building as you were growing up, was this individual identity. And the cult is going to ask you to separate yourself from that and break that down so that you're only doing what's good for the group. And that's how
Okay.
they eventually get into abuse and exploitation.
Okay, that makes sense. So like the part where I'm like hesitating is a lot of times asking people to sacrifice for a larger good is a wonderful thing. But I see what you're saying when you say self-sacrifice, when they say, but in order to do that, you have to give up your individuality. Yeah, no,
Yes.
you don't.
Yes.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Exactly. And again, I have a 10-part list of what makes something a cult, and self sacrifice is only number 4, right?
Right.
And it is also the constant self sacrifice. There is a difference with sometimes having to do a lot for a cause that you care about, but then getting to go and recover. In the cult, you don't get that. In the
Right.
army, you don't get that. You are right back on it the next day as the mission requires. And so you are constantly breaking yourself in service of the mission, but you're also breaking your ability to kind of push back against something that the group is doing that is harmful to you.
Yeah. So, but as you were describing it, of course, the army popped into my head, right? The military of any country, and other things like fraternities, etc. So we'll get to all that in a sec. The isolation part also makes a lot of sense. But then I've done so much self-sacrifice. I feel like that I was like, wait, am I in a cult? And then you said they need to be skinny, and I was like, yes, I'm not in a cult. Okay, so I dodged that bullet.
I
Okay.
have this thing, which is one of my fun contributions to the field that I call the skinny white woman. And it was literally, I was watching Allison Mack getting arrested, and I was like, why? and then Ghislaine Maxwell. And I was like, what is it? And I was like, oh, she's whitewashing the sins of the cult leader, right? Because in sort of American white supremacy, you have the pure, good white woman. And, that's how they do it, right? The cult leader, often male, especially in these larger commune cults, is usually kind of a ridiculous flub, actually. But you have these very posh, skinny, controlled white ladies kind of like holding it up.
Interesting.
And
So,
also, of course, keeping you skinny just is a good way to control you.
yeah, maybe it's another part of self-sacrifice, right? And
it is a visible form of self-sacrifice. And so it
right.
becomes one of those things. And it's also something else that's important to cults. It's never enough, right? You're never skinny enough. You are always striving. You can always be more. And that is what the cult needs from you, is the constant mission, the constant striving, the constant work.
Yeah. So I want to get back to the military and other potential cults, including political ones that we often talk about on the show. But before we do that, you survived a cult. Tell me about that. What cult was it, and what happened?
So I was born 3 generations into like the leadership circle of the Children of God cult. The Children of God cult is one of these sort of run of the mill 60s cults where he takes evangelical purity, let's call it, and his unique value proposition is he switches it and he says, we're going to have free love, which very quickly turns into what I call forced polyamory. Then he starts with religious prostitution and gets into kind of actually advocating pedophilia. So that's one of the things Children of God is famous for. Also, a founding member of Fleetwood Mac joined the cult early on. And most famously, Rose McGowan and Joaquin and River Phoenix were all celebrities that grew up in that cult because our product was performance. And so I was born in the Philippines in this cult, spent my life growing up in Asia and Latin America, dancing on the streets, dancing in videos. There's one video of 6 white children doing an apocalypse rap in downtown Rio.
Wow.
The end time rap, it's called. And yeah.
So how did they start the sex, and when? I'm afraid to ask.
How did they start the what? Sorry.
The sex and when? Like, so they're using you to do like rap videos in the streets, etc., doing all this exploitive stuff. When did they turn to, oh, by the way, this also involves sex?
Yeah, I mean, and this is one of those things where if you talk to almost any of the joiners, they will tell you, no, in the beginning it was just about Jesus and love and, recruiting all these hippies who wanted to change the world, and he was the prophet of God. But, he was a heavily abused boy turned into man who was already being very abusive to his children and daughters-in-law, et cetera, when he started the cult. So it was always there in the background. He very quickly discarded his wife that he started the organization with, took up with his younger secretary, his skinny white woman, if you will, and then started pimping her out. And then that became a revelation to all of the women. And this is the 70s. By the 80s, he's on the cover of Time magazine as a sex cult. And then they really have to like flee, scatter all over the world and whitewash. And I mean, they had a very, very successful whitewash because the Children of God would perform twice at the White House in the 90s.
Wow.
But they basically said, okay, we're going to stop doing all the outward open sex stuff, and we're going to just be the family of love. Internally, I believe when you don't change the values of the organization, right, the abuse never stops. So there was still plenty of that for us growing up.
Yeah. How'd you wind up leaving the cult?
So when I was 15, I climbed over the walls of the commune and went to go fellowship with a non-believer so that they would kick me out.
Hmm. So when did you realize, wait, this isn't right? Because when you're growing up in something, it's so hard to see objectively.
So I was suffering some very, very horrendous abuse at the age of 5 and 6, and definitely had the moment of being like, if this is God, forget it. Um, but I kind of just don't ever think I believed in any of it. I think I'm a like sort of neurodivergent atheist that was born to religious extremists. And from the age of 11, I was trying to make my plans to escape. I, mostly self-taught Brazilian Portuguese so that I could go off into the woods if I could. Part of the reason why they kept moving us around the world was to keep us destabilized, geographic abuse. And
Hmm.
part of the problem of being third generation is all of your living family members are kind of connected to this. Um, in the end, I would get sort of lucky because my mother, who's only 15 years older than me, had been at some point married off to an older man who had some children on the outside. And one of them agreed to take me in when I was 15. And that was when I first, moved to the United States for the first time and into the whole great state of Texas cult. So that was really fun too.
All right, so let's talk about how it connects to other cults. Because when you say, "Oh, he dumped his first wife and started having sex with his secretary," it reminds me of Joseph Smith, right? And the
Yep.
Mormon religion. And he says, "Oh yeah, God's talking to me." And then one day he comes out and says, "Oh yeah, by the way, God says that I should have sex with my maid." And everybody's like, "Oh yeah, that makes sense." Except his wife. His wife's like, "God didn't tell you that." And he's like, "Shut up." And then he takes the maid, and then he takes a couple other people,
Mhm.
etc. So and religion overall asks you for a lot of sacrifice, and then tells you that your religion is the right religion, and you definitely shouldn't listen to the other religions.
Yeah.
A form of isolation to some degree. So where do we draw the line?
So here's the thing, cults and religions are separate.
Hmm.
So, in my definition of cult, the number two is they give you a worldview. It doesn't have to be a religion, it's a worldview. And often it's formed out of a bunch of random things. Religions, especially, patriarchal religions from about 2000 years ago, happen to be a little bit easy to use to manipulate people if you want to. But the problem is never like the ism or the entity, right? It's never the ideology. You can make up, you can write a sci-fi novel and make it your cult. We call that Scientology. Um, which
Yeah,
then then branched all of the est and a landmark and all those big large group awareness trainings that have trained some of your corporate people.
yeah.
One of the things, so I was an intelligence officer in the military, and the way we tracked was through tactics, techniques, and procedures. And this is one of the things I keep saying. It's like I just want people to see the tactics. And so this is, the first book I wrote is my story, Uncultured, about going from cult to army and how that paralleled. But then this book, I wanted to show people like, here are the tactics in like real cults that you all recognize, right? Like Mormons, like Children of God, like these big bad guys. And then here are the tactics, same tactics in the US military. And then here are the tactics in organizations around us. And it has only escalated severely in the 3 years that I have been writing the book.
So Daniela, tell us a little bit about the similarities between the cult you were in and the U.S. military.
Yeah, well, you definitely don't know what you signed up for. So for me, it was the first day of basic training. You're standing there, you're holding this 50-pound duffel bag over your head, and you're getting yelled at. And I'm there, I'm 22 years old. I've just finished college. I've been out of the cult for about 6 years. And I recognized the tactic, you know? I was like, okay, I know what they're doing. I know they're not going to hit me. I know this is going to go for like an hour or two. And it's, I had this realization like, oh, I just joined another cult, you know? And so basic training is sort of your typical cult indoctrination, right? They take you away, they change your name to private so and so, right? They isolate you completely from everything you've known. If you're a man, they cut off your hair, you know, and then they start working the brainwashing tactics on you. Um, One of my bigger realizations as well in the similarities was that a military deployment, when you go away together as a unit, like you're going to have a cultic experience. And that to me, like as an organizational psychologist, was like, wow, that tells me a lot about, you know, soldier suicidal ideology. And it tells me a lot about even just the struggles to reintegrate and kind of how bonkers it is, right? To go from like a year in a cult at war and then just come home and go back to your family like nothing happened.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I mean, finally, it's really on the other side where like every struggle of veterans fitting back into society is the same. I'm actually writing a musical now, and my cult baby survivors and my veteran survivors have the same struggles.
Hmm. Yeah, it's interesting. Look, that analogy is like pretty stark because what does the military do? They break down your identity. They don't want you
Mhm.
to be an individual. They want you to be an army of one. And
Yeah,
and then what do they want you to do with that? Well, then they're going to program you, and they program you in that case to kill. And you have to break down the person's identity, and you have to get them to buy into that way of thinking. Otherwise, human beings don't naturally kill one another. You've got to
right.
train them
And
to be able to kill.
and this is what I always say. I'm like any discussion of the military is what militaries do is they program individuals to conduct violence on behalf of state, right? Like that's what it is. There's a reason you want to be talking to all the veterans around you right now, because number one, they never deprogram us, right? But like you're becoming a different person, right? You don't even get to go back to being a civilian ever again. Now you're a veteran. Like you have been changed by your experience in this. And I think you know, some of these things are even, we're seeing right now why they're so necessary. The geographic abuse, for example, right? We move soldiers all around the country every 3 to 6 years. It wreaks havoc on us and our families and our relationships. But it is so that a tyrant cannot take over and have a bunch of military officers with loyal followings. You don't have a single brigade in the active United States military that has a single political leaning, right? So you
Mhm.
cannot have this kind of runaway Civil War esque stuff that you had before. So they're doing it for a reason, these
Yeah.
tactics. I just think the conversation we're not willing to have is that we ask 1% of our country to be in a cult in order to protect us.
Yeah.
Um, and I
Uh,
think if we're not going to end the US military, but I think if we had that conversation, we could maybe lower the suicide rate. We could maybe help not only with veterans when they come out, but maybe with even some of the toxic, awful behavior inside the military as well.
Yeah, so I totally get what you're saying, and obviously it applies to all militaries, not just the U.S. military. So finally, let's get to cults in potentially in nationalism and politics, because they want you to be. Let's pick a couple of different things: a Republican, a Democrat, and you have to be only that, and you have to hate the other side, and don't. And these days, don't interact with the other side, okay? Stay in your isolation, stay in your group. Don't have any individual ideas. You have to believe in orthodoxy and you cannot waver from orthodoxy, right? So, and then you've got the nationalistic cults. The Turks are the best, and being in favor of Turks is a moral good in and of itself, and is a more important moral good than actually doing the right thing to individual actors, right? I picked Turks just because I'm
Right.
Turkish, right? But it obviously applies to any nationality. So are those in some ways a cult?
Yeah, I mean, especially here where you have binary, right? Like what cults thrive on binary thinking, right? You're either in or out, it's good or bad, it's all or nothing. And in Democrat versus Republican politics, like just by being binary, that is going to be somewhat culty. And also, as you alluded to, the isolation. I think I was saying 5 years ago, the first sign of war is when communications stop between the two sides, right? And like we are in a modern day sort of version of this. And technology has changed the game in so many interesting ways because it's actually breaking down a lot of the OG cults that relied on more physical isolation. But it's really helping, any whack job with an idea get a platform, but it's also really helping to separate Americans. There are, I'm sure, entire Americans that don't even know that this platform exists, right? Whereas, like, it used to be, I say when my grandfather joined a cult in 1970, if you wanted to isolate an American, you kind of had to take them away to your compound in Texas or Brazil or the state of Utah, um, in order to control what they were going to have access to. But now, with sort of an app for everything, for every taste, uh, it we are so polarized. We're not seeing what the other side is seeing, and we're not talking to each other anymore. And there's absolutely become an all or nothing
Yeah.
aspect to our politics. And then, if you notice, every election cycle now, it is the apocalypse, right? And this has been going on for at least 20 years, if not since the Reagan era, when I feel that a lot of this got started. Um, and then I think there's obviously like MAGA is a cult. Like that is a cult. They even refer to themselves as a group. And it's kind of the culmination of a 40, 50 year, conglomeration of all of these cults of idea that have been building. And then somebody put them all together.
Yeah.
And yeah,
So but I don't think MAGA is the only cult in politics, right?
I
So I mean,
agree.
so let's say take two on our side. So a lot of the extreme left says if you disagree even a little bit, that's it. You're a heretic. You're a Nazi. You're with the right wing. You're MAGA. You're a Trump supporter. I mean, one disagreement will get you banished like that.
Yes.
That
And
reeks of cult.
and this is called purity testing in cult speak. And I've started a book on fascism, and the number one word I've already used is purity, right? It's like this is the pursuit of purity is how you get to the most dangerous thing about cults, my number 10, which is ends justifies the means, right?
Yes.
We're
Yes.
seeing this on both sides, especially around Middle East topics, right? Just all or nothing, purity, and it's on both sides. And the lack of ability to see through it, but also the willingness to justify your side because it is your side,
Yeah.
and not even be willing to engage in conversation is like that has been a huge shift in our country in the last, I would say, 50 years.
And on that one, the Democratic Party at large is even more guilty these days. It used to be the Republican Party would banish anyone who criticized other Republicans. It was Reagan's 11th Amendment, never criticize another Republican, right? Now the Democratic Party, I mean, for a long time now they're finally breaking this, and it's such a relief. But never criticize Biden, never criticize Pelosi, never criticize another Democrat. Then if you do, you're with the other side. And you should be banished, and no one should talk to you, right?
Yeah.
And it really, when they start saying no one should talk to you, that's when you know it's a cult, in my opinion, right?
Right.
And so then that leads to the last two examples. So I remember when Dick Cheney said, after we invade Iraq, Iran then offers up actually a deal to us that was terrific to get rid of some of their weapons, et cetera, and do what we wanted, because honestly, they got scared, right? And Dick Cheney refused it and said, we don't talk to evil, because talking to the other side humanizes them, et cetera, and he doesn't want them humanized, he wanted to attack them, right?
Right.
So finally,
and even this emphasis on this line between good and evil, right? And I always say, like, the thing about lines in the sand is they're easy to erase. Spent a lot of time on the border of Afghanistan and Pakistan, and like there are no lines there, right? And so it is this, like, when you are unable to engage in a conversation, when you are cutting people off from other sources or topics, yeah. But really, I think we have to acknowledge that there's good and evil in all of us, and this has unfortunately kind of been one of the things about the messaging of this country, the United States, right? We're the good guys, really, really loudly. And now we're living through a moment, I think, when many of us starting to realize that, hey, maybe all of these systems are not so great. So which is when cults pop up, by the way. Cults pop up in times of social turmoil. So like, we are redoing a lot of the topics of the 60s and 70s, right? And trying to push them further. And some people are trying to push them the other way. And unsurprisingly, in times of social turmoil, uprise the people who promise you the answers. Right. And this is one of my things for people is like, be so skeptical of anyone giving you an easy answer, right? Like Elon Musk was never going to take us to Mars when the world's best scientists can't build a functioning biodome. Like there are no easy answers in the world right now. They are all complicated topics that are going to have tons of discussion. And we're never going to get through them if we can't have the discussion.
So look, for rational people, obviously everybody's got good and evil in them. And obviously it's not determined by what religion, race, ethnicity you were born into, right? That's just scientific, it's empirical. But, and I've never called them this, but now that you've described all this, want to ask you about the Israeli cult. Because they say never talk to anyone who criticizes Israel, call them anti-Semitic, and drive them from the conversation. And we just did a story on the Young Turks about Jewish parents that are really mad at their kids because they voted for Mamdani. And it was almost like they were saying, we raised them to be racist, and they wouldn't be. And we wanted them to hate Muslims and to vote against Muslims. We wanted them to support Israel above all, and they wouldn't do it. And they're so mad that their cult training didn't work on their kids because they were in the general atmosphere of America, which I take great pride in as an American, by the way, and in that sense. And it literally said, Daniela, I wish we'd sent them to Israel more so that, and as you were talking, I was like, oh, so they can get isolated with only that tribe and get indoctrinated into that tribe's way of thinking and only support that tribe and say, and the one that scares me the most, number 10, we're all in danger, so we must protect this tribe by any means necessary.
Yes. I want to preface by saying I'm very, very careful and hesitant about talking about the Middle East just because I'm a former intelligence officer trained on and deployed to the Middle East. So that being said, right, I do think that there's a lot of cult think goes into this exact thing that you are talking about with parents trying to control the children. And what I would say is interesting, though, is what you were saying. So first of all, there's a lot of end justifies the means mentality in all of this. I agree with you. And it's all very, very scary. There's also anti-Semitism in almost every conspiracy theory historically. And that really comes into cult think too, right? So this gets like, I think, as you have said, just a super complicated question. But what's kind of cool is that indoctrinating children just rarely works in the long term, is what we're finding out. Like now that we've had, we've really only been studying cults since the 70s, right? And so it's been this like process of finding things out. But we are finding out, and especially if you cannot keep your perfect isolation that you mentioned, it is really, really hard to brainwash people, right? That is why you have segments of large groups in New York City that are completely isolated off, right? Because if they're allowed out, they're going to be infected by all the diversity that is there. So that, like, the good news is the brainwashing is not working, right? Like the majority of Mormons are leaving the church, even though they have more money than Heavenly Father. Like the way that cults die is when they fail to keep and recruit the next generation.
Yeah.
And I do think that's happening. I just think we're right in the middle of it right now. And so it's really scary.
Yeah, and it's not just to pick on the Israelis. Yes, they are clearly doing the most damage these days in like body count and in so many different ways. But lots of communities, including Muslim communities, come to America and they want to keep their kids isolated. And some of them might have points of view of like never marry outside of your nationality or your religion, or maybe they think that being gay is wrong. Right? And they're like, oh no, now we're in America and they don't even think being gay is wrong. Well, yeah, sorry, but we broke your cult. Okay. And
yeah.
So,
and this is kind of ironically what happened to the children of God, right? Like he was very racist and ultimately white supremacist. But then he fled around the world and had children of all races because they were doing, international flirty fishing, and then raised us all and told us we were all the same. So, we don't, it kind of, they kind of broke their own racism. And I love it when that happens. I love it when they get caught in like their own traps, like these cult leaders will die of curable diseases because they can't go to the hospital because they've told their people that, cults always hate doctors.
So well, that does kind of get you to believe in karma a little bit.
Yeah, I have to tell you my coolest line from the book and see what you think. Which is, I say that cults always promise space travel.
Really? Do they?
So here's what happened. When the Space Force was announced, I was just jumping around my house going, oh my gosh, it's so culty, right? Like I have to figure it out. It's so culty. They named themselves the Guardians, as in of the galaxy. Like that's the official term for spacemen and women. And I was like, why is it always space travel, right? Like our cult leader told us we were going to live in a golden city inside the moon. The Mormons were promised a whole planet, except they lost it recently, right? Obviously you have Scientology, and then of course you have Heaven's Gate. And so again, this is the kind of thing that makes me a different kind of scholar, I think, right? Because I just like feel something and I'm like, I know, let me go figure it out. And I think, we call it metaphorical space, right? But I think it's actually crucial to coercive control that whatever you're being promised is beyond the pale, right? It's in another body, it's in another form, it's on another planet, it's in another dimension, right? It's always, you have to keep going further.
Yeah. So, I mean, look, it gets pretty close to heaven, which is kind of also in space. And so give me all your labor, your body, your this and your that, everything you have now in this reality. And I promise there'll be a great reality for you at a much later time in space, heaven, or wherever they promised you, right? So yeah, I'll take my heaven right now.
And
Thank
I've
you
even
very much.
found I've even found, so one of the most useful things I think I tell people is that cults can also appear in the form of one cults, which is usually some kind of an abusive relationship, and single family cults. Westboro Baptist Church is the most famous, but there are many. And so as I've started talking about space travel, I have found that in single family cults, it is often the promise of a trip to Disney World. So sometimes it's Space Mountain.
Can even be Space Mountain. Okay. I'm worried because I did promise my kids Space Mountain at one point. So
it's just one tactic. It's just one tactic. And also, if you deliver said space travel, it's fine.
We
right?
did.
But it's the promise with the never being delivered, right? The constant moving of the goalposts, which is, of course, something we are seeing a lot these days.
About 3 weeks ago, we were actually on Space Mountain. So
Yay.
we delivered, so that I guess it's not.
You're safe. Right. You're safe.
All right, everybody check out Daniela Mestenek-Young. Her new book is called The Culting of America, What Makes a Cult and Why We Love Them. And she's known as on YouTube at Knitting Cult Lady. And seems to have lived up to that reputation. All right.
there's no the, because the is culty. Most cults start with the because it is a subconscious clue that I'm the only one.
Huh,
and if you're thinking about Tigger right now, you are right.
Okay, all right. And things I did not know. All right, Daniela, thank you for joining us. Really appreciate it.
Thanks so much for having me, Cenk.